Are talent attraction and retention or improving employee engagement on your radar? If so, building a healthy culture is a critical first step for unlocking potential and driving long-term success. Tier 1 Performance offers several free resources to prime your thinking, assess your culture, and help you get started. If you want to maximize culture to support high-performing teams and thriving organizations, connect with Tier 1 at tier1performance.com/culture.
Welcome to the Accidental Trainer, a podcast where you'll hear firsthand stories and tips on how to start and grow your training career.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of ATD Accidental Trainer podcast. I'm your host, Alexandria Clapp, and today we have with us Katrina Kennedy. Hi, Katrina.
Hi, Alexandria. Good to be here with you.
Thank you for joining. Katrina is the principal consultant of Katrina Kennedy Training. She is a trainer of trainers, a master trainer, and this is why I've asked her to join us today to help kick off 2024 and talk a little bit about some of her facilitation tips and tricks and secrets. And before we talk about that, I want to jump into a little bit of your career story. So can you share, how did you land in your role today? What was accidental and or purposeful in your journey?
Well, my career started out completely accidental. I was working for the district attorney's office enforcing child support. We were going through a huge change initiative, and my manager was in a meeting with me, and she was walking around the room, and she stopped at my chair and she said, "Katrina, you can talk." And that was my introduction to learning and development. I had the opportunity to train a lot of people and also then get my master's and then ultimately go out on my own 27 years ago this month. So that was the intentional part, but definitely found the profession accidentally.
Yay. Well, happy work anniversary to you.
Thank you.
And as I mentioned, I love connecting with you and chatting about facilitation because you are another science of learning enthusiast. And I know that you have experience working in both virtual and in-person settings. And whether or not we have folks who are working with a hybrid workforce, or maybe they've been doing virtual for a while, now they're going back to in-person training. I know that you have probably some great insight to share, great perspective. So I want to talk about retrieval practice with you. This is something that I've seen folks get excited about. They want to be incorporating evidence-based methods that are going to help improve their learners' retention or just help with transfer, do something that's more science of learning based, but struggle with how to actually put that into practice to apply it. So I know you have a lot of ideas for this, but let's level set first. Can you help define what exactly retrieval practice is?
Absolutely. So retrieval practice is getting your learning out of your head. Like, really simply put, we spend so much time, getting things in our head, but getting it out is where the learning actually occurs.
Yeah, I think there's evidence that you're strengthening the actual memory when you're doing the act of retrieval. We have this misconception that the act is actually you put it in a filing cabinet and it's the storing, but the retrieval piece is just as important, maybe more important.
It's actually, I think, more important. That's where you really create that strong neural connection between the idea that came in and the idea that you ultimately want to transfer to the workplace. And retrieval practice has been shown to be the strongest way to transfer something from training to work.
I feel like it can be challenging maybe to work with learners because that's uncomfortable to do that act of retrieving for especially something that you don't know yet. So I'm so curious what your process is. Do you help train your learners a little bit about you're going to do this method and it's going to be uncomfortable, but this is why? I know, and I'm asking because I feel like this is a leading question. But I used to do that in my experience to help get the buy-in. So it was doing a little bit of teaching about the science of learning before then we go and actually do the task. Otherwise, we lean towards, just humans in general will lean towards these exercises or activities that are more of a passive learning approach. And ultimately, they might feel better, but are not actually helping with the learning piece.
I do a little bit of explaining the science of learning behind people, but not so much that they become overwhelmed by it. I want them to see an immediate result. So I think if you start with a simple retrieval practice, something short and small with an easier concept, and they can see how that works out for them, then you're going to get the buy-in. Then you can give them a little bit more of the science behind it and then continue to use it in a deeper way. Because I train trainers almost exclusively, they tend to be really excited about it. They tend to not need the reasoning behind it as much. And I think when they can see the results of it, then they'll really buy in.
Yeah. As you described, that reminded me of like working with kids where we would have them do a task and let them do the task with their own technique and then see how that played out and whether or not they remembered something. And usually they wouldn't. There would be a breakdown, or maybe you'd have to do a couple trials or rounds before they start to see their method is breaking down. And then that would be the moment where we would introduce our technique. And we're teaching them mnemonics, things like linking and associations and things that are just better techniques.
Right.
So that made me think, you can use that strategy with adults maybe as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Every time I introduce retrieval practice to adults, the first thing they often say is, I wish I'd known this when I was in school. Because they can see that, a relatively simple act of just saying, recall two things that we've covered. And I'm not even asking them to recall those so that I can say you got those right. I just want them to have that moment to think. I want them to have that moment that they realize it's in there. And as soon as it comes out, we've strengthened it and they're going to keep it long term. I think there are so many ways that we can incorporate retrieval practice into our work that it almost becomes overwhelming for people because you have so many options.
Yeah. Okay. I want to start to get specific with some concrete examples, just in case people are listening right now and saying, oh, it still seems really abstract. Like how is this done? And I know this is what you do every day, all day, every day.
Right. And why is she so nerdy about like all the things you can do with retrieval? So the easiest one that takes almost no time is just to ask after you've gone through some content, or even days after you've gone through a module, to say, tell me two things you can remember. And you can do two things in a variety of ways. I can say, turn to your neighbor, tell your neighbor two things. I can ask them to write down two things. That can be on paper, that could be in chat, that could be with annotation, that could be on a whiteboard. So write down two things. Shout out two things. If you have a really boisterous group that likes to be a little wild. So that two things just gets them retrieving what they've got in there. And then you get this bonus that I hear your two things, and that triggers the two I didn't think of. So now we're getting the benefit of collaborative learning as well.
I like that. Fun exercise that I stole, I think, from Jonathan Halls, because he did a facilitation that I was in, was you create a quiz with your team and then you pass off that quiz to someone else. And you can break that down into smaller groups. You could just have like a group of 4 people or just one person, and you can pair people up. So I'm creating a list of 5 questions and then I give it to you and you've given me your quiz. And it's a way where the act of creating the quiz is a retrieval practice. And then you get a whole new retrieval practice opportunity when you get to take someone else's quiz and maybe they came up with different questions in the material than you thought of.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then I'm going to tell you a trainer secret that I collect all those quizzes and I keep them. And now I have a data bank of quiz questions that were learner generated, that if my next class, I don't have enough time for them to generate the quiz questions, I just use the previous classes. Because the learner questions tend to be much better at helping people retrieve than the questions I come up as someone who knows all the information.
I love that you pointed that out because I was going to talk about something that I used to do. And then okay, this is great. This is great. We were like, oh, we need to do retrieval practice. This is what we're going to do. And we would do these like daily quizzes that we made, and it covered like a bunch of things from the day before. And well, at first we did them like at the end of the day. And then we were like expected them to come back the next day and have taken the quiz. And we're like, okay, this is a bad idea. We'll create time in the training. And then we have the data point of what is everyone getting wrong? Because then we can make space and cover that content again.
Right.
But we realized like a better use of time instead of us making these quizzes is for them to do it themselves. I love that you shared the secret of then like keeping that information. And one thing I was thinking about too is I think that you can do this in-person and or virtual, or if it's a blended type of learning experience. What I'm thinking of in my old organization, it was a mix, this blended experience. So we would do in-person trainings, but we would send out the quizzes like virtually, or they could do them virtually. They had the option, or create them virtually, like for each other as like a follow-up before the next in-person meeting.
Yeah, I love that. I think virtually anything that we do in person for retrieval can be taken into the virtual environment, and you save time, because I think ultimately for all of us, there's not enough time. We're always trying to create, opportunities to do things faster, and retrieval practice can be one of those things that disappears because we feel like we don't have time for it. But if we, tell me two things, or we can do a brain dump. Brain dump is a fun one too, where you just write everything that you can recall for the next 2 minutes. And nobody checks it. It's not graded, just like the quizzes aren't graded. It's just about the act of getting it out of your head and realizing what you have in there. And then also, again, strengthening that connection so you keep it long term.
Yeah, I love that you brought up that one. I think that you can choose or not choose to sort of gamify it. And like who can come up with the most things in just 2 minutes, and even just like the small timestamps, like it doesn't need to be 20 minutes of like thinking about things is a fun way to do it. Even if it's just arbitrary, it's like points, or like you get admiration from all of your peers. Like it's still something that people care about. They're like, I want to have the admiration of my peers that I had one more thing in the brain dump. But then I also realized like there can be a time and place, like maybe for some groups, like that's really motivating, but you also totally don't have to gamify. But I'm just thinking again of some of the things that we've tested out and played around with, like in my old organization. So I also want to go back to something that you said. Because when you started giving examples, you said you can turn to a partner and say, let's talk about two things, or you can write something down. So I just wanted to make it explicit that the active retrieval practice, it can be verbal, it can be writing something down. So there are a lot of different ways to do it. So I wanted to make sure we were calling that out. I'm trying to reinforce it with a little bit of repetition here. So hopefully folks are getting lots of ideas and getting excited about this. Do you have any tips of things to kind of keep in mind that helps you to facilitate retrieval practice well?
Yeah, I think one of the important things is that if you are quizzing, you may not want to call it a quiz, and you want it to be low to no stakes. So I'm not using it as a means of completion. I'm not even really intending to use it as assessment. Is there an assessment element to it that I can benefit from? Absolutely. But I'm using it for the learner. This is really their opportunity. And anytime that you, as the facilitator, want to say something like, let's review, there's your opportunity for retrieval. It's have your learner say or write or even think. You can just ask them to think. Take 2 minutes and think about what you can recall from this module, or take 2 minutes and think about what we covered yesterday about, and give them the topic. So that writing, talking, thinking, those are all going to be helpful. And it doesn't have to be long, and it doesn't have to be at the end. Spaced retrieval practice throughout a program is going to be more beneficial than just saving it up for the end.
Yeah. Okay. I have 2 different things that I want to ask you about, follow up with. First, when you were talking about writing, talking, thinking, an idea popped into my head about visualizing. Maybe that's just another form of thinking, because there's been cool studies where it's like if you visualize the steps, the process that you're going to do before you do it. There was one interesting study of folks who've had like a surgery. And so they kind of think through how they're going to get out of bed and where they're going to put the weight of their body, like on their hand, to help them get out of their bed and into their walker or wheelchair or whatever it is, which is like a low stakes environment. So I feel like that's like a form of retrieval practice, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We see athletes do it. And there was this wild study that I think is fitting for the beginning of the year about people who thought about working out actually lost weight.
Oh my goodness.
By thinking about it, not actually doing it, but thinking about it. I mean, it wasn't substantial, but the act of thinking about it was more beneficial than not doing anything at all.
Gosh, that's really cool. It's just like how strong the mind-body connection is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think in all of it, it's that we're making some effort. You're putting some effort in. And I think that's such an easy thing to avoid sometimes as life presents all of the things it presents to us. Just taking that effortful time.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good word to use to get me back to the other thing that I wanted to follow up on, which is spaced retrieval practice. I think sometimes we can have the illusion of knowing when you do retrieval practice too early, too soon. And that's when the discomfort can come when you incorporate that spaced piece. And so in my old organization, we're trying to train students to develop this awareness so they can apply it to their homework and their own lives. And so sometimes it was like an experiment, like, when should you practice retrieving this information again? When is too long? Like, what's sort of the right sweet spot of interrupting the forgetting process? And is it feeling too easy? So should you maybe wait a little bit longer until you retrieve it again? It was really cool to see kids then come up with, I think that you should ask me about this topic. We'll do the next retrieval practice in 2 days, or ask me about it next week. It'll be a full 7 weeks. And they're kind of taking ownership of that process, knowing, well, it was too easy, so now I need to wait.
That's really powerful. And I love that you said 2 days, because there's research that supports that 2 nights of sleep is really essential for our learning. So if we space our retrieval practice out over 2 days, which then really lends itself to blended learning and learning over time versus one big chunk of learning. So those 2 nights sleep, then we do retrieval, your odds are that you're going to retrieve more than you expected, and you're going to retrieve more than if we wait longer. And you're going to overcome that illusion of knowing if we retrieve too soon.
And for folks who are listening, and I get this all the time, where they want sort of the stats, the facts, the business case to make a case for spacing out their learning. And we don't want to cram this all into a 12-day marathon, like tour de force kind of situation. Use this conversation, say, Katrina Kennedy said that our learners are going to benefit from having 2 days sleep before they cover this information again. And you can use that to help make the case for spacing out your training programs. I 100% recommend that anyone and everyone do that.
I'm working with a client right now that we're doing a virtual session 1 week. And then a week later, we're doing an in-person session, and we're doing that over several weeks. And I am pleasantly surprised on that second week when we come together, whether it's virtual or in person. We start with a retrieval activity, usually something fun. I'll use something like Kahoot or Mentimeter. We'll gamify it a bit. And I'm always surprised how much they remember, but also how much they realize they don't, which I think is just as important as knowing that we know something.
Yeah. Okay. So this conversation is going so well. I'm so excited because I wanted to bring up the topic of when you don't get something right, or like, how do you handle like answer keys? Because there can be some negative effects if you're doing the retrieval practice, but then you don't have the right information, you don't have the right feedback of what is the right answer or what to do if maybe you have it sort of right, but not all the way right. So do you have any facilitator recommendations for how to handle that so you're best supporting that learner's journey? Because they're going to get things wrong.
Right. Absolutely. Like that's part of getting things wrong is part of learning. So retrieval practice alone is going to be good. You're going to have benefit. Spaced retrieval practice is going to give you more benefit. Then spaced retrieval practice with feedback is going to give you the most benefit. And that feedback can come in a lot of forms. So it could be, if you're doing something like a Kahoot where you're quizzing them, if you can build that feedback right into the Kahoot so they see the explanation as soon as they got it wrong, so that they can reinforce it. If it's peer-to-peer, I think it's really powerful when you get that feedback from your peer in a fun, lighthearted way. You know, none of what we do with retrieval practice is meant to be punitive. It's not meant to be in any way like checking up on you. It's really about you as the learner getting it out. So, I have keys for the quizzes, but try to get them right into the content so they're talking about it with their answer. And then when they're doing things out loud, if they're doing things out loud in the room or in the virtual space where they're sharing that in front of everyone, obviously I want them to save face. I want to acknowledge when people don't get it right and gently give them the right thing. I think people are appreciative of that. And again, it just goes to like lightheartedness is the word that comes to mind for me, like not taking it too seriously, making learning something that's fun. And then going back to where we started, Alexandria, where we talked about, making sure that people understand the why.
So can you tell us, how does being in a virtual setting impact retrieval practice, or does it, in your opinion?
I think being in a virtual setting actually makes retrieval practice easier. There are a variety of tools that we can use for it. We can use whiteboards. We can then see what everyone is sharing. And so that helps to make the feedback easier. We can come back to something that we started earlier so that we can space our retrieval practice in a way that builds upon it as we go through a course. And then you have so many tools like Kahoot and Mentimeter and Socrative. You can use annotation. I think you just end up with a variety of things that are available, whether it's sending people to breakout rooms so that they can do retrieval practice in small groups or do it individually. So we end up having a lot more flexibility in the virtual environment.
And I know you and I have talked before about Google Docs. And when we were recently doing the intensive program, some of the speakers used that for assignments in their sessions, which was really cool because you could see other people in other breakout rooms and their responses as you're working on yours in like a different section of the document.
Exactly. I love to use Google Slides and give each breakout room a particular slide to work on. And then you can have them rotate to the next slide to see what other groups did. So adding another layer to the retrieval practice. The only thing with Google documents that I run into that I feel like you have to be aware of is, as an external trainer, there are some organizations that block it. A lot of government organizations will block access to Google. So it can be tricky if you haven't really asked that question before you work with an organization.
Have you done it with a different tool? In that case, you'd probably just use some of the ones you mentioned before, like I haven't heard of Socrative. Is that what you said?
Yeah, Socrative. So Socrative is a lot. It's basically a quiz software. It was really popular. It's really popular in education. It works like Kahoot, but without all of the bells and whistles that Kahoot has. It's a pretty simple format.
Gosh, I'm forgetting what I used one time for just a virtual kind of community conversation type session for TK a few years ago. And it was really simple. So if you want to do a lot of customization, you wouldn't be able to do it. But just to have like I was able to set up a few note cards and then people could grab stickies and add. So a very simplified version of something like a Miro or a mural board. But I find sometimes that those can be a learning curve for folks and you need to spend some time kind of practicing so they even understand, like, how do I create a sticky and how do I add text to it? And how do I get it to, why am I suddenly in a different section of this board? So something that's just more simplified sometimes is better and easier.
Absolutely. If you're doing a longer program where people are retrieving over and over, then I think it's worth the time to teach them how to use a whiteboard like Miro or Mural, or even Zoom's whiteboard, which has gotten really, really good, I think. But there is definitely a learning curve for any of those tools. So sometimes something as simple as a piece of paper and asking people to write 4 things down that they can retrieve can be an easy way to do it as well. And then because they're actually physically writing, we know the retrieval practice is stronger. We can have people type, and for accessibility issues, I think we have to offer that. But I think we need to invite people to go to paper as often as they can.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just looking at the time, and I want to jump over to reflection because I think, well, maybe I should hold back from my thoughts about it. I know you have lots of thoughts and lots of passion about reflection. So I want to ask you, what does that mean to you? How do you work it into your work as a trainer?
So I do have a lot of thoughts about reflection. For me, reflection is looking back on the information that you've covered and deciding how you're going to use it or how you can use it. I think we naturally do that anytime we're learning. We take someone's idea and we think, well, how will that apply to me? How will I do that? And so building reflection time into our training gives people time to do that deeper thinking that's so important for the transfer to the work. So retrieval is really bringing the idea up, and then reflection is saying, okay, what is the value of this? What does this mean for me?
Yeah, I like that definition. I feel that they're very interconnected, and the act of doing a retrieval practice, or if you're generating ideas, if you've written down this and that, then the next piece that makes sense is this sort of evaluative process where you could look at what you've just generated and say, it's an opportunity to say, okay, maybe I didn't know as much as I thought I did, or maybe the strategy that I was using wasn't helpful, or there's still sections of this that I'm not confident on, and what can I go back and fill in the gaps, or all those types of things that you have a more accurate understanding only after you've been able to do the retrieval piece.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've had someone in class who said to me, asking me to retrieve and reflect was like giving me a quiz. And so I think for adult learners, it is, it's a quiz in disguise, and they can see the benefit of it rather than giving them a multiple choice questionnaire to complete. It's really creating a connection to their daily work life.
Yeah. You mentioned it before, like the key, I think, is the low stakes, where you're not like grading it. It's an opportunity really for the learner. And there's not that pressure associated with like, I need to know all of this right now. That makes it so valuable. Okay. But I want you to tell us, do you have any specific kind of examples or exercises that you use to build reflection opportunities into your training?
I have a lot. One of the things that I love to do towards the end of a class, but it doesn't have to be at the end, is just ask two questions. One question is, I will use, it's really a statement that they finish. So I will use. And then the second one is tell me more about. So it's reflection in a bit of a disguise. So learners grab two sticky notes, whether that's in the virtual environment or in the in-person, and they just respond. I will use whatever the method is, and then tell me more about whatever it is from class. And so they're thinking about it and also giving me some feedback. So there's kind of double benefit. And they're thinking about their learning, they're telling me about their learning, but they're also telling me and revealing in an easier way what they may not have a firm grasp of yet. So that's one quick and easy way. Then I can also just ask people to ask them a very specific question about their learning, and then ask them to take 2 minutes or 3 minutes to write. So for that quick reflection, you want your question to be really specific, because if you just say, write about everything you've learned today, then that's going to be too broad and overwhelming. Mm-hmm. But a 2-minute write, I think if you place it periodically through a program, gives people that time to stop, reflect, pause, take that little mental break that they need. It reduces some cognitive load. And I had a participant tell me recently that as an introvert, it just gave her a moment to breathe. And I think sometimes just that breathing becomes important for our learning as well.
Yeah. I like doing something that's a reflection as an exit ticket at the end of the day, that you're free to go once you do this, but keeping it short. I know you mentioned 2 minutes, but maybe it's a targeted 2 or 3 questions. And one of them could be like, what's the hardest thing? Or what was the trickiest topic? Or what are you feeling stuck on or unsure about? Or what do you want to come back and revisit? Yeah. I feel like those are all good, fun reflection questions. What's something you said, though, it made me go back to sort of the definition that you were giving of looking back on what you've learned and how you can use it. I know we've talked about metacognition before. It just made me think about, I always think about these metacognitive regulation phases around a task. So there's a before the task, and then during the task, and then after the task. I'm trying to simplify it. And I think of reflection as happening after the task, but it technically is a reflection when you're doing something before the task and during. where you're kind of checking in with yourself and what you're doing and is it working, or beforehand, what do you need to succeed to do the thing ahead? So I was kind of thinking about your definition and saying it still like applies even if it's before the thing that you're doing, because you're reflecting on what you've learned and then how you're going to apply it.
Right. Absolutely. Well, and I think we can take that a step further too, and think about the questions that we can ask people at the beginning of a class. What do you already know? What do you want from this? Those become very reflective as well. They may not fit my definition as precisely, but it's really that moment of thinking about what we're doing and relating it to your life and relating it to your work. It's that self moment.
So do you have recommendations or suggestions where it depends on the type of activity or task that you're doing? Like some type of reflection is going to be more effective than others. I don't know if I'm setting this question up the right way.
Yeah, and I don't know that I have an answer for that. I like to really think about how difficult is the activity, and the more difficult the activity is, I think the more the reflection becomes important. Not just for giving people a break from the task, but also really getting them to think about it. And that might be an important time too, to ask questions about how people are feeling, not just about how they're going to use it or what is difficult, but, how are you feeling about this process? Like, we're humans. We have to acknowledge that we have emotion involved in learning new skills and taking on new behaviors. And I think acknowledging those feelings can help people to address them so that they can really be open to learning.
Yeah. Something I started to add on maybe in my head that it could be your level of expertise or experience with the thing that you're working on or learning. And so maybe that could impact the frequency, perhaps, of when you're doing reflection. Because I could see, like you said, the difficulty, and I'm kind of tacking on your experience level with it. I think or my fear would be that maybe people would spend too much time reflecting and not enough time then just going and doing. And then maybe it's okay where you have like the permission to fail, permission for it to be messy, just keep trying. And then have these like strategic check-ins where you reflect a little. If it's like every single time and you're struggling and it's really hard and you're not making any progress, that could create some, I imagine, fatigue or frustration. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that if you are out there, if you're doing something on your own, if you're learning on your own, you're probably more likely to get stuck in that reflective, I can't do this, what's wrong with me, why don't I, that negative reflection. And that might be where you need to have a little bit more structure and a little bit more like getting out of that and recognizing that it's, that failure or not doing well is part of the learning process.
I'm now jumping around to thinking about being in a group and like the value of peer reflection. Maybe that's just feedback. What do you think? What are your thoughts?
I think that peer reflection helps with exactly what we were just talking about with when we get mired in the failure. That if we take time to reflect on a process with our peers, sometimes they give us perspective that we wouldn't have on our own. Sometimes they give us validation. And so I think when things are more difficult, that's probably the time to go to peer reflection. And so people know that they're not alone. And I know that when I have asked people to reflect or to share their reflections in a group, that after something that has been difficult, that you can see almost this relief on people when they realize they're not the only one that had a struggle.
Yeah. Ooh, I like that. So I think we've talked about the interconnectedness, right? The relationship between retrieval practice and reflection. That was a goal of mine. And thank you for entertaining me with just giving lots of stories and examples of how you incorporate some science of learning principles into your work. I know this is a big passion of mine. And my hope is that our community and our listeners are also getting excited about this and thinking about new ways that they can kind of boost or change what they're already doing and make sure that they're trying out some of these techniques.
Yeah, I'm absolutely obsessed with the science of learning. So it's always good to find someone to talk to about it.
Okay, let's switch gears to you. So what are some of your learning goals this year?
So I have one learning goal, and that is really to put myself into the role of a learner more often. So I'm doing that with two things. I've been learning how to throw pottery on a wheel for the last year, and I've also been tabletop gaming every Saturday for the last year with my family. And they don't seem related to learning and development, but I've discovered they're completely related. I'm really bad at pottery and I'm a really poor learner, I've discovered. I like to know what I know and have expertise in it, which most of my life in a cerebral way, I've been able to do that. And so this is challenging me to do things that are hard. And so I've been writing about it and keeping notes on both processes so that I can really relate to the people I spend time with in training much more than I might have without pottery and tabletop gaming.
Okay, I have a meta follow-up question for you. So I like those examples because they're very procedural. And that makes me wonder about retrieval practice and or reflection. Do you incorporate that into your learning for how to throw pottery?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I do a lot of verbal retrieval practice. After I have had time on the wheel by just talking through, usually with my husband, I make him listen to all the steps that are needed. And then every time I learn something new, I make him listen to that. And then I've also been journaling the process as well, which I really, really think there's some retrieval of the steps. And then there's a lot of reflection on why am I reacting to the process in the way that I'm reacting? Why am I not okay with being bad at this? And it's some good self-development, I think.
Yeah, gosh, that happens really, I feel like to everyone, it's like a lifelong lesson, I think, is being okay and comfortable with being uncomfortable, which is what learning is. But if you can like take on that mantra, then, that's just like will help you navigate life because things can get uncomfortable. So that's so awesome that you are practicing what you preach and you are forcing yourself into these new uncomfortable situations. Thanks for sharing.
You're welcome.
Okay, so where can folks find you and keep up with your activity?
So I post somewhat regularly on LinkedIn. And then I also blog at KatrinaKennedy.com.
And I want you to give a little plug for your upcoming activity in February.
Oh, yeah, that would be a good idea, wouldn't it? So I'm doing a pre-workshop at ATD Tech Conference in Los Angeles. And then I am on basically on virtual training and engagement. And then I'm doing a session during the conference on how to use breakout rooms in creative ways.
Yeah, I'm so excited to hopefully sit in on one or both of those and get to see you in action. I think I met you last year in one of Cassie's sessions and you guys were exchanging ideas and I just knew I had to have you on my radar. So I'm so glad that we have gotten to connect and chat a little bit about some of your facilitation best practices. Thank you so much, Katrina.
Thank you, Alexandra. It was great having this conversation.
Thank you to our sponsor, Tier 1 Performance.